Prichard Colón's funeral has become one of the most emotional moments in boxing this year, as family, fellow fighters and fans gather to say a final goodbye to a young man whose life was forever changed by one night in the ring. Colón was only 33 when he passed away on August 13, 2026, closing out a journey that lasted nearly 11 years beyond the fight that ended his career and reshaped everything that came after. For the people gathering to honor him, this isn't simply a farewell to a former professional boxer. It's a farewell to a son, a beloved family member, a rising Puerto Rican star, and a man whose endurance became a symbol far beyond the sport that made him known. Long before his name became tied to one of boxing's most painful stories, Prichard Colón was an undefeated prospect with 16 wins, 13 knockouts, and a future that looked wide open. He was just 23 years old when he stepped into the ring against Terrel Williams in Fairfax, Virginia, in October 2015, a fight nobody watching that night could have known would change his life forever. Colón had reportedly complained of feeling unwell during the bout, and what followed became one of the most widely discussed examples of how quickly a boxing match can turn into a medical emergency. He suffered a severe brain injury, was rushed for emergency treatment and spent 221 days in a coma. When he eventually emerged, the career that once seemed destined for major titles was no longer possible. Instead of training for his next fight, Prichard required long-term care, and his family became the center of a battle that would stretch on for nearly 11 more years. His father, Prichard Colón, became a constant presence and advocate, keeping supporters updated and preserving his son's connection to the boxing world even as the years passed. When Richard confirmed Prichard's death, the news spread quickly, drawing tributes from organizations, fighters, and fans who had never forgotten his story. The World Boxing Organization honored his resilience and his family's strength, while the World Boxing Council had already recognized him as an honorary champion back in 2021. A sign of just how far his legacy had grown beyond his win-loss record. That's really the heart of why this funeral carries so much weight. People aren't only mourning what Prichard lost that night in 2015, they're honoring everything he came to represent in the years afterward. Boxing demands discipline, endurance, and the will to keep going when exhaustion sets in, and Prichard's life became an extraordinary example of that same principle playing out far outside the ring. His fight was no longer measured in rounds or scorecards. It was measured in days, months, and years in rehabilitation, in small moments of progress, and in a family that simply refused to let go. That's why the word warrior has followed him for over a decade. He entered the sport as a fighter in the traditional sense, but he left behind something much larger, a symbol of what endurance really looks like when it's carried by the people who love you most. While fans could offer prayers and support from a distance, it was his parents living the daily reality of his condition, adjusting their entire lives around his needs while still holding on to hope, still seeing the son they knew before that October night rather than only the injury that followed. Reports have made clear that the exact cause of his death hasn't been publicly disclosed, so it's important to separate what's confirmed from speculation. What is known is that he lived for over a decade with the severe lasting effects of that 2015 injury, and that his father confirmed his passing at 33 years old. In many ways, that fact alone says everything that needs to be said, without needing further explanation. His case also left a permanent mark on the sport itself. The kind of illegal blows that ended his career became so closely tied to his name that boxing's own governing bodies changed their rules because of what happened to him, a policy shift meant to protect every fighter who steps into a ring after him. It's a rare and sobering kind of legacy, one built not on championship belts, but on the changes made so that no one else would have to endure exactly what he did. As the boxing community gathers for his memorial, many will remember the young man who was undefeated, confident, and full of promise before that fight, someone whose amateur career and early professional record suggested a future that could have included major titles. Nobody can say for certain what he might have achieved, and that unanswered question remains one of the most heartbreaking parts of his story. But the absence of those future victories doesn't mean his life lacked meaning. In the years since, people who never watched one of his fights learned his name simply because of how he endured, and his story became part of larger conversations about fighter safety and medical responsibility inside combat sports, conversations that will likely continue long after this week's services conclude. At the funeral itself, the focus naturally shifts away from controversy and back toward the person his family actually knew, not a case study or a headline, but a son who was deeply loved. That distinction matters enormously to the people closest to him. The public may remember an undefeated record and a devastating injury, but his family remembers his voice, his personality, his private jokes, and the ordinary, unrecorded moments that never made it into any article. For over a decade, they carried a version of grief that most people never have to face, watching the future they imagined for him disappear while still choosing every single day to show up for him anyway. Now as they lay him to rest, that same devotion is what's being honored, not just his talent in the ring but the family who refused to let the world forget him, and the fans who kept his name alive through a period most athletes never have to endure. There will be tears at this farewell, and there will be quiet moments of reflection, But there will also be something his loved ones have carried for years, a deep and lasting pride, pride in the fighter he once was, pride in the strength he showed afterward, and pride in knowing his story reached far beyond the boundaries of any boxing ring. Prichard Colón never got the chance to complete the career he dreamed about as a young, undefeated prospect from Puerto Rico, but he left behind a different kind of legacy, one earned not through a title fight but through 11 years of endurance and the unwavering love of the people who never stopped standing beside him. As the boxing world says its final goodbye this week, one message rises above everything else. Prichard Colón was never just the tragedy that changed his life. He was a son, a fighter, and ultimately, a warrior whose greatest and longest battle was never recorded on any scorecard at all.